All right, hi, I'm Jerry D'Agostino. I'm a professor in quant methods here at the college. And this is Emily Rodgers, and she's a faculty member in teaching and learning. And we are also PIs on the Read Recovery Scale Up I3 project, which started in October of 2010. So we're 3 years in, okay? And let me just give you, we're handing out now some of our materials. Okay. When we first proposed in the summer of 2010 for the first wave of I3 funded projects, the original proposal did not require a logic model. Okay, there was no logic model initially required. But soon after funding in October of 2010, IES, Institute of Educational Sciences, got involved in the evaluations, probably for two reasons. One, they realized that these were going to be high-profile projects. And two, the evaluations that had originally been proposed varied dramatically in quality, okay, and rigor. So IES got involved, and then IES hired a subcontractor to help them with technical assistance, and that's when Apt Associates got involved in the external evaluations. At that point, we were required to develop two logic models in concert with our evaluation team. Okay, and our evaluation team is at the University of Pennsylvania, and that's the C3 group. We had to develop an implementation logic model and also a scale-up logic model. The implementation model was, how does this program work? What are the key inputs? What are some mediators and moderators? And then what are the key outcomes? The scale-up model is, how are you going to, what's the plan, what's the logic of how you're going to scale out the project to reach more schools, districts, and states, for example. Okay? Now, interestingly, you might think that about 30 years into implementation in the United States, their Reading Recovery would have have a logic model. You might also think that SFA and Teach for America and the KIP project, those are the other scale-up, the initial scale-up funded projects, they would have logic models. Actually, none of them did. Okay, interestingly. So at that point, there was a lot of work put into developing these particular logic models, and Emily took the lead. I think a lot of it was in her head, but it was never really articulated, right, in a logic model way. And I can, as I was very involved in this project, it was really the instrument, the facilitator, that led to us explaining to the external evaluator what this is about and what we're trying to obtain. Just think about it. A lot of these hired guns, they are skilled in methodology. They don't necessarily know about your model, about your intervention. So this really served as a great dialogue piece to sit down and say, here's what we try to accomplish. And then they can develop a more targeted, more accurate evaluation model around the logic models. So Emily's going to go through some of ours. You can see they're rather detailed, and I'll stop there and let you take over.
What we have up here is the logic model for the implementation of Read Recovery. The inputs, the outputs, and the outcomes. These things exist with or without the grant. That existed before the grant, not on paper, but like this. But will continue to exist after the grant is over. The one that's not up here, we have a copy of, is the, as Jerry said, the logic model with the scale up. What's different, thing that we would like to add to the presentations that we've already heard about how to construct logic models. I think what you'll see that's a little different on ours is that, well, one is that at the bottom you'll notice of both models, we identified moderators and we also identified assumptions, and we found them very helpful. A moderators are variables that facilitate or hinder the relationship between the inputs and the outcomes. So in other words, once we put together the model, here are the things we want to accomplish. With the scale up, with the implementation, here are the things Read Recovery accomplishes. Once we identified that, and the inputs, who's going to do what, we thought about, well, what are the things that might happen? What are the things that exist that might actually facilitate or hinder some of these things happening. So for example, on the scale of 1, you'll see recruitment and retention of reading recovery students, teachers, teacher leaders in schools. So our success in that, in achieving that, and having that input set up and achieving the outcome will depend upon how well we recruit students. Alignment of priorities between our scale up and implementation of reading recovery with fidelity to our standards. We knew that that was something that's important, but that it could also hinder or facilitate our reaching our outcomes. So just thinking about, we even have here too as well, stability of the leadership in universities. In other words, the faculty of our 18 university partners working on this, whether or not they were stable, whether or not their centers could be successful, all of that would influence the outcome at the end. So identifying moderators, I think, is really helpful and important. The other thing we identified as well were our assumptions. I think that our assumptions are essentially that. I mean, they're assertions that inform this model. Why do we think these relationships are going to work? What assumptions are we built on? So for each model, you'll see we've identified, in some cases, evidence-based statements that support our thinking for why these outcomes might occur when you have these inputs. I think that those kinds of statements will be really helpful to external evaluators as well. Something different on our logic model from the example you see are the arrows. We worked a long time on those arrows. And sometimes I stop at like arrows in models, theoretical models about the reading process, for example. I'll just make them all bi-directional and let's go home, And just see if we can smack down there without a lot of thought. A lot of thought went into these, and they're actually very, very important and very helpful. We have to think about, for example, on the scale-up model, if you look at that. On the input side, in the scale-up model, these are the inputs that exist for the scale-up of the project. You can identify the input side 4 different sources of technical expertise. Our external evaluator, the Consortium for Policy Research and Education, CPRE, they're part of the input and part of the input. Jerry and I think sometimes known as the I3 team at OSU. Yeah, I mean, we have it's a huge branch with small but mighty group of people working on these outcomes at OSU. Leadership of the North American Trainers Group. Those are the other faculty, like the reading recovery faculty in the center here at OSU, at the 18 other partner universities. And a final source of expertise from the teacher leaders who prepare the regional training sites who actually train the teachers. Now, so you have 4 sources of technical expertise. Who does what? At OSU I3, would we be responsible for helping to recruit students and recruit teachers? No, we're not. We decided we weren't going to do that because in our logic model, the implementation of reading recovery, the work that goes on all the time, that kind of effort is often also directed by the faculty at the universities. So you'll see, you look down to training and resources from university partners. Their work has to do with recruitment, has to do with training and preparing teacher leaders, and so forth. So the arrows actually have been very helpful to us, and sometimes we've even gone back to the arrows to say, are we giving input to the faculty partners?
Who's responsible for what?
Are they giving us input,
Yeah.
or are we going to them for technical expertise?
Yeah, I think that's what Melinda was pointing out too, that this also helps lead into the management plan in terms of, divvying up who's responsible for what in your grand scheme of things. And because it does show, these relationships between, human inputs and outcomes. All right, so what's this here?
Well, and so this is extra as well. This is the theory of action that informs the models. I think all logic models are probably informed by some theory of action. How, what is it we think is happening for these things to occur? What's important? So with this, in our theory of action, we think that with these resources, plus that instruction, you're going to get impacts at the school level and also at the student level. And it's theoretical as well. And under resources, for example, you'll see almost in the middle there, or at the top, there's reader recovery teacher leader. According to education reform literature, the role of a change agent in the school district is really important. And our change agent in the reader recovery network is the teacher leader. So that person is there at the top. So you can see a lot of arrows come out from that person and impacting the teacher, but also the system and being informed by the university side.
And this is the core intervention right here.
It's right there.
Right.
And
So we can even make that more molecular and talk more about what is the theory of emerging literacy that the intervention is based on. You want to try, if you have the theory, you want to try to articulate it in your models. I gather one knock against a lot of logic models is they're overly mechanical, and they're kind of they're black box like. There's just inputs and outputs. So if you can get inside that black box and try to articulate the theory that's going to explain how you get from the inputs to the output, the inputs to the outputs, which we sort of do there, but we could have added more depth to the theory behind Clay's model. But of course, you got to think about how many pages do you have for the proposal.
That's all fit on the dinner napkin, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's one part. Yeah. What else? Oh, and then talk about how it's led to the implementation of fidelity. Okay, so now all I3 projects have to come up with a fidelity of implementation measure, right? And then that has to be included in the evaluation. So the logic model also served as, the implementation one served as really the foundation that led to our measure, which we didn't bring with us, our fidelity measure. If you want to see it, we'll show it to you. But, right, we started with this when we said you need a fidelity measure now. Let's go to the model. This became really the agreement on what we're going to do. Yeah.
And who's going to do it?
And who's going to do it? Anything else to say? We're under time.
Yeah, you have 4 minutes.
We'll leave some. Any questions? What is a fidelity of implementation measure? Let's see. The napkin answer. It is a measure that you would collect on each case, individuals who are providing the intervention, right? And you're asking, what is the degree to which you are following the guidelines for implementation? To what degree are you implementing what you're supposed to be implementing? Because not all sites implement the intervention as planned. So you go out and you measure that, and the logic is that becomes a moderating variable because one may hypothesize that those who follow the plan and implement to a greater degree are going to have better outputs, higher outputs.
An example might be, let's suppose, Teacher America and their evaluation.
Right.
They find that students didn't do all that great, and there wasn't huge change in school. Well, the Teacher America folks might say, well, yeah, but no wonder, because the places where it was implemented, they didn't do it the way we said it should be implemented.
Right.
So you want to have a notion of, was it implemented the way it should be implemented? And if it was, then the spec goes out.
What you're going to find is variability in effect across sites. It's just a naturally occurring thing because, again, you're not going to get the same Starbucks coffee every time you go into a Starbucks throughout the country. So then this helps you understand why. Why is that the case? What were the moderating variables that led to variation in treatment effects? Or did you ever? No, you had.
This is something that's commonly asked for, or you provided this?
It has now been asked for. They keep rolling out these different requirements. So, don't forget, I think that's one of the messages, just because you get funded, that doesn't mean that you're not going to be asked for more things along the way. Okay?
It means that you will.
You would
Yes. And you didn't originally plan for that in your budget. So now you're doing work that you didn't think you were going to have to do. So that's the nature of having long-term grants. Yeah.
One of the things, the software that allows you to make these arrows, which one do you use?
I think you just use the sophisticated word
Yeah.
program, right? you just drop, you can just have arrows go to tables. Yeah, it's pretty basic. I think you just did this in Word.
Let's develop a software.
There you go. Logic model software, does one exist? Yes, Lori?
This also could be a question for others as well, but I have a 2-year grant proposal that I'm putting together. So I'm looking at the outcomes here, that you have three columns.
Yeah.
And then I'm looking at
Short term.
timelines, and I'm trying to figure out how to put this together. It gets messy with, are 2 fine and 3 for just 2 years?
Yeah, I think then you have to think to yourself, what's feasible that we can pull off in 2 years, right? The long-term ones, they could go beyond the grant period. I mean, they could be more like hypothetical. This is why we're doing this now. We're recovering children's reading trajectories in first grade because we're hypothesizing that those will continue up until their 12th grade and on throughout their life, right? But obviously, the grant's going to end before we can track these individuals until they're adults. It's more of a hypothetical. So you have to decide if you want to put that in, or the drawback would be you may confuse reviewers and saying, wait a minute, they're going to try to measure long-term goals? How are they going to do this in a 2-year grant? So you have to be very clear that those are long-term hypotheticals that are going to extend beyond the grant period.
So your timeline doesn't seem to be in any of some of these proposals. You've got
No.
a little timeline, so that's a separate, you've got the logic model, and then you have a timeline somewhere else.
Yeah. Logic models aren't necessarily schedules, time schedules. They're more theoretical. They're more, here's how this works. Here's the action plan about what we're going to bring to the table resource-wise and how it's going to be transformed into these outcomes. So it's not, you could put time in there if you wanted to, if you could articulate it. But these kind of transcend time, don't they?
Well, in the scale-up logic model, the most specificity we have is in year 1, we're going to do this, and by year 5, we're going to do this, and year 5 is essentially our project goals. There will be these many teachers, there will be these many new teacher holders, and so on. So that is a specific topic.
But it's not a timeline.
No.
Yeah, I mean, you can have a timeline in there on deliverables and the like, but I think most would say logic models are not timelines. If you could merge them, that would be great. But it might be difficult because these are more theoretical and extend beyond the grant cycle.
Okay.
Does that help?